We have announced last year, which was a big step in our strategy, we have announced net zero carbon emission strategy. And to achieve this net zero, there are several actions which are taken in all our activities, not only renewables, obviously, but there is also the idea to grow our share of mix in renewables. So we are targeting by 2050 to have 40% renewables and electricity in general, 40% gas, and the rest in oil. And to achieve that, obviously, it requires an absolutely massive development of our renewables portfolio.
Hello and welcome to Energy Unplugged by Aurora. This podcast features various experts from Aurora having in-depth conversations with key industry leaders, policymakers and academics from all over the world. It explores the hottest topics across the energy market and gives a unique perspective on major energy issues.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Energy Unplugged. I'm Mateusz Wronski, the head of digital solutions at Aurora. And my guest on today's show is the creator and current head of the Renewables division at one of the largest energy companies in the world. Before that, he served in the cabinet of the French President François Hollande, where he was responsible for overhauling the French nuclear industry, which for those of our listeners who are less familiar with the French system, is responsible for some 70-80% of all power produced in France. An engineer by training, he graduated from École Polytechnique, and amongst his other roles, he currently serves as the chief engineer of the prestigious Corps des Mines. My guest on today's show is Julien Pouget, Senior Vice President for Renewables at Total. Julien, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Hello, Matthew.
Julien, let me start by asking a little bit about your background and your journey. So some 6 years ago, you were entrusted by the French president with a mammoth task of overhauling the French nuclear sector. French nuclear sector, like I said, is a massive part of the economy and not exactly known for embracing change. So two questions, really. How did you find yourself in that role and how did you go about it?
So I was in charge of advising about all industry-related questions, the president first, and then also some digital-related matters. But when I started, quite quickly, the situation in the French nuclear industry was quite complicated, with heavy difficulties, notably for Areva. As you may know, and there was really a question of how to turn around this company and more generally the sector. It happened that I had worked in the nuclear industry in the past when I was working for Alstom, so I had a bit of knowledge of this industry. So this is the reason why I started to work on the matter and to leverage on my knowledge to contribute to this overhaul of the nuclear industry in France.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I imagine that, like I said, it's a pretty daunting task. An industry that's massive is not exactly, like I said, known for being particularly agile and prone to changing. So what were the biggest challenges in implementing that change, and what exactly was your agenda and your goal?
The situation, of the industry at this stage was really complicated. So, which is, I would say, in a way, a good situation to implement changes, because when all the people, when the unions and the overall industry is convinced that change is absolutely necessary, it's a bit easier to implement the change. We jointly with the industry, we studied the situation, what led basically to the split of Areva into two companies. One, which is Framatome, which was the nuclear construction arm of Areva, and the other part, which became today Orano. And I, for what I see, this transformation has been successfully implemented, and I believe that things are working now on a better ground.
So it seems like we reached an inflection point and a critical mass to actually push that change forward. Okay, so you focus on nuclear and were part of the team implementing change. Why did you move to renewables? Because nuclear, like you said, was a big part of your career to that date. Why move to renewables?
It's true that I spent significant parts of my career working on energy-related topics. Mm-hmm. And obviously, especially when you look at the power sector, renewables are very clearly the future. So I was very happy towards the opportunity, which has been proposed to me by the CEO of Total, Patrick Pouget, to contribute to developing this activity at Total.
It seems from my perspective, just looking at your current role, that you seem to have specialized in driving difficult change. So after driving that change for the nuclear industry, you in Total, which is an oil supermajor, created the renewables division and focused on that. What were the key challenges in this situation in shifting the focus of an organization like Total? And I suppose, how do you compare that to driving that change as a part of the public sector previously?
It's a very interesting situation at Total. I was expecting a bit of difficulties to contribute to this, what is now seen as a transformation of the group. Actually, there was a lot of support from the overall organization. So everybody at Total has been very supportive to the development of the renewables arm of Total. It has been a very positive journey, and it is true not only at the top of the company, but I would say across the whole company. So I was very impressed and a bit surprised that there was zero resistance to this change. So actually the change part, the conviction part, I would say, of this change was the easy part of it. Obviously, it's a bit different from our, I would say, historical and current core business. So there were things to adjust. And we got a lot of support from the top of management of the group to implement this change and to, I would say, treat renewables in a way that allowed us to grow in a relatively quick way. Because maybe, as you have seen, we had, when I started, was 300 megawatts basically in operation of mostly solar projects. Today, we have 7.5 gigawatts in operation, more than 5 gigawatts of projects under construction across PV, wind, offshore wind, battery storage. We have developed a portfolio of 23 gigawatts of solar wind, offshore wind projects. So obviously the scale has changed. We are in the middle of this evolution, this transformation, but I would say thanks to the support of the management of the group at all levels, we have been able to implement this change in a very, very smooth way. And in addition to that, to be frank, there are difficulties, but there are also a lot of potential. I mean, when you have the financial and industrial strengths of a group like Total supporting your activity, it's, in my opinion, a major differentiating factor to be able to deploy such a new activity.
Can I ask you a bit more about these difficulties you mentioned? It's interesting, I think, from many of our listeners' perspective, what an oil supermajor's transition like this towards renewables looks like from the inside. What are the kind of key obstacles to overcome still?
You know, renewables projects are investment projects, and we are used to investing in huge projects, but there are some differences compared to oil and gas projects. For example, we know very well the resource, the solar resource, which is very different in the oil and gas sector. We know very well, in general, the revenues. Obviously, this is evolving a bit, but we, in general, have corporate or public PPAs. So this makes the renewable investments a bit different from usual historical investment from the group. And this led to a bit of change. Financing is a very important part of our model. And we had to adjust our business model to take into account these specificities. And also to ensure that our investors would accept and support this heavy investment in this new energy. Our investors obviously are used to, I would say, a very significant level of cash flows and returns on projects which are much more risky in a way. Here you have stable cash flows, quite predictable, and you have a bit lower returns, which you can compensate through leveraging with senior debt, but also leveraging with what we now do as part of our model, farm downs, and then you come back to double-digit returns, which are more acceptable, especially because you have long-term, well-understood cash flows. And so our investors understand and support this model that we have developed.
So leverage seems like it's the key part of getting your, I suppose, equity IRR and return profile in line with your historical profile in the oil and gas space. Is that a fair?
Yeah, it's correct. It's exactly the business model that we have put in place and disclosed, by the way, which is we have the project level IRR, which is obviously low, as you know, in the renewable space compared to what we are used to. Then we lever it with a significant amount of senior debt. And then we found down basically half of our share. And as you know, there is plenty of money flowing in this sector, so the returns are quite attractive here. And the combination of these various stages of leverage lead us to a level of return which is double digit and more acceptable for our shareholders.
But the nature of risk is nonetheless slightly different, and I suppose investors in oil markets, I suppose, understand these risks quite well that pertain to the carbohydrates industry. Is that explaining this new profile of risk? Is that something that, I suppose, how do investors embrace that new types of risk? Do you find yourself spending a lot of time educating investors as to how this differs from the previous model?
You know, it's true that electricity is new, relatively new, I would say, to the group, and it's quite different from oil and gas, as I was saying. But our investors, they understand that the predictability of cash flows, the predictability of our returns is quite different. So you have a kind of risk-reward profile which is different from the other side of our business. And this has also a value. And as you may know, it's very significantly recognized by the markets today when you take some of our pure renewable, I would say, peers or competitors in the market today.
I just wanted to drill down a bit more on that risk question. So in various surveys and from our own conversations with institutional investors, with pension funds, with insurers, often they mention price risks, maybe alongside liquidity risks, as one of the key challenges or barriers to invest in renewables. How do you see these price risks, and what is Total's and your strategy of mitigating them?
It's true that the concept of having predictable cash flows requires not only to know well the resource, which is the case in solar and wind, for instance, but also to know well your price. So the price is a key topic. So our strategy here is very clear. We are looking for corporate PPAs, or we are looking for public PPAs, but we want to have our revenues covered for a period of time by PPAs in order to have this price visibility, which obviously reduces a lot, almost down to zero, the price-related risks.
And do you see the PPA market growing at a significantly enough rate? Because 100 gigawatts, so maybe just zooming out, your target is 100 gigawatts, and I would like to come back to that in a second. But that is a lot of green power. Do you see the corporate PPA market growing enough to be able to absorb, obviously not just your target, but the very ambitious goals that both the private and the public sector have in this space?
we are seeing the very, very significant growth of the PPA, corporate PPA market today. And to be frank, we were one of the largest corporate PPA off-takers last year and probably also this year, because we decided to use a large share of our portfolio of solar farms under development in Spain to cover 100% of our electricity consumption in Europe. And we are doing exactly the same this year in the US. So it's a massive corporate PPA that we have put in place between our solar farms in Spain and Europe and our solar farms in the US and our activities, our sites, our industrial sites in the US. And we see a lot of other players, a lot of other industries also taking the same route. And I see personally a massive growth in the corporate PPA as well. Yes.
So one might say you're leading by example by signing big PPAs yourselves.
I think it was a good way to support our projects too first, and applying your talk to yourself is quite a good way to pave the way for further partnerships with other companies. And this is what we are doing today. We have now signed several corporate PPAs, and we see that growing in Spain, we see that growing in the US, obviously, where the market is there for now quite a long time and very, very active. And we see that growing basically in a lot of geographies in the world.
So I said I would come back to the target itself, 100 gigawatts by 2030. And it is one of the most ambitious renewables goals in the industry. It's more ambitious than majority of your peers from the oil and gas sector, but also majority of traditional power utilities. I suppose my question is, why 100 gigawatts other than it's a nice round number, and why now?
We have announced last year, which was a big step in our strategy, we have announced a net zero carbon emission strategy. And to achieve this net zero, there are several actions which are taken in all our activities, not only renewables, obviously, but there is also the idea to grow our share of mix in renewables. So we are targeting by 2050 to have 40% renewables and electricity in general, 40% gas, and the rest in oil. And to achieve that, obviously, it requires an absolutely massive development of our renewables portfolio. We have put, I would say, milestones. And when you look at where we should be in 2030 in order to be able to reach our ambition for 2050, I mean, this 100 gigawatts is basically the result of this calculation. We really have the ambition to reach this 100 gigawatts by 2030. And then there was a question, are we really able to achieve that? And this is why we have worked also on a milestone in 2025 based on what we have achieved up to now. And when you look at what we have achieved, so today, as I said, we have 7.5 gigawatts in operation, we have more than 5 gigawatts under construction, and we have a portfolio of 23 gigawatts. So we were convinced that we could achieve a level of 35 gigawatts in operation by 2025. And when you look at our plans and our portfolio of projects, it looks like very credible to add 10 gigawatts per year after 2025, and then to be very close to the figure of 100 gigawatts by 2030.
It's a huge scale up, nonetheless. Like you say, it sounds achievable, and but it's from 7.5 to 100 in 9 years or so. What makes you confident that you can deliver on that target? And I suppose what further change? So you mentioned some changes. You mentioned a lot of support internally. And a clear strategy around financing, but are there any further changes that will be required to reach that target organizationally for Total?
Well, first, there is the market is there, so it's a good foundation. I mean, to achieve our ambition. So the market is huge, as you know, and 100 gigawatts is a share of this huge market development. Second, we are also convinced that we can achieve that because of what we have already achieved over the last few years and the way we have been able in 2020 and now 2021 to grow our portfolio of projects under development and under construction. So based on that, we feel confident that we can grow our development arm in order to be able to achieve the first target, which is 2025, and then go on developing a significant amount of projects. In terms of organization, obviously, it's a challenge because delivering all these projects requires obviously a kind of industrialization of the delivery of the projects and then the operation of the projects compared to what we have been doing over the last few years. And this is where the group has decided to combine all our technical and project resources, technology resources under one significant large organization, central organization that we call One Tech, and which will be several thousands of engineers, which will be dedicated to all our activities, so not only the renewables, but really the idea is to leverage on the existing strengths in project deployment and project implementation, and also in design, engineering in general, to leverage them to implement our portfolio of projects in the renewable space.
Mm-hmm. So a big internal consolidation and an industrialization of the process.
To come back to this, it's really supported internally as a decade of transformation for the group. So this One Tech is part of this transformation. The deployment of our portfolio in renewables is also part of this transformation. And as another example, we also want not only to leverage our technical skills, but also to leverage our international footprint. We are active in 130 countries in the world, and more than 50 with a very significant presence. And I think it's a specificity of our company and our peers, so that we can leverage on this footprint by deploying renewables experts in the field and allowing us to grow quicker our portfolio of renewables projects.
Do you see that being a general trend? So for companies, I suppose, like oil and gas supermajors entering the space and leveraging that scale, do you suspect or do you think that this will lead to a higher level of concentration in renewable space? At the same time, we also obviously see some trends pointing to the opposite. What do you think the equilibrium here is?
It's difficult to say because as we discussed earlier, the market is huge and it's growing very quickly. And there is a lot of tailwinds to the increase in the market. So there is room for a lot of players. We have been participating to some extent to the concentration of the market. And there have been several, not only by us, obviously, but several acquisitions well known over the last few years. So there is a clear trend for concentration. But also what we see, and we are quite happy with that, is that we have also been able to develop our projects in a, I would say, semi-organic way. So we have developed our own team of developers organically. We are working with local developers also. And we see that it's a nice way to grow our portfolio. It's a nice way also because, as you may know, today, I would say the market is very, very active and prices for acquisition are, I would say, extremely high. So it's also good to have built our own forces to be able to develop our own projects organically and not only by through concentration in the market. Interesting.
And do you think that that focus on developing your own project, is that, and I suppose starting from Greenfield, is that also a part of your strategy to chase higher risk return. I think that's probably still a part of the industry where the profile is slightly more risky. Is that fair to say? Is that a part of your strategy?
I mean, we are doing a mix of greenfield development. We are also entering into pipelines under development or in various stages of development. We are also jointly developing because, as you know, in the oil and gas industry, partnering is part of the DNA. So we like partnering with other companies of various sizes. So we are quite open on the way to build our portfolio, but we are really driven by value. I mean, we really want to and have to and have systematically managed to get to the level of profitability on the project that we are looking for.
And I suppose one endeavor that looks both particularly risky, but particularly also maybe able to leverage your capabilities, which is something you mentioned before, and something I think a lot of our listeners are particularly interested in is floating offshore wind. Could you tell us a bit more about this and Total's strategy in floating offshore wind?
Before discussing about floating offshore, I would like to speak about offshore. Obviously, we like a lot offshore wind now because it's high load factors, large-scale projects, which is fit with our other activities, and we can really leverage our technical skills of the offshore field to these offshore wind activities. We have been entering this field with a Seagreen project in the UK, which is under construction today, jointly with SSE. And we have been developing our positions in offshore wind over the last few months. And now we have built, I think, quite a significant level of portfolio of projects, some under construction, others under development. And we will go on developing this footprint. Floating offshore is a bit less mature, obviously, but we believe there is a huge potential here. And this is also an area where I believe we can contribute through our technical knowledge a lot to the industrialization of this technology. So this is why we have really decided to invest a lot here. We have now a portfolio of more than 2.5 gigawatts of projects in South Korea, in the UK, a bit in France. And we will grow this portfolio. We are developing these projects, obviously, and we are also investing heavily in research and development on this technology. And we are convinced that there is a lot to do. Obviously, the key enabler is to manage to industrialize it and to bring it to the level of cost which are competitive for the market.
And do you think that's a matter of how many years to bring these costs down? And I suppose what makes you confident this is doable?
It's obviously a difficult question because there is still a lot to do in this field. But when you look at the potential and the load factors that you can reach, I mean, by leveraging what we can bring to this industry, we are quite convinced that there is a way to competitiveness.
Big bet on renewables in I suppose upstream, but you're also, as Total, with your recent acquisitions, very much entering the retail space. Question: why pursue this effective vertical integration in power?
We are present across the full value chain in our other activities, and it makes a lot of sense to be there also in the electricity sector. We are not only, by the way, present in the upstream part, in the generation part on the customer side, but we are also very active in trading, and trading is a key part to be able to deliver, for instance, corporate PPAs, which are competitive and baseload for our customers. And this is what we did for what we call our green electricity contracts, both in the US and in Europe. If I take the example of Europe, we have been converting our solar electricity from Spain into baseload electricity for all our sites in Europe.
That is very interesting because I think some would say the jury is still out, or at least there's still a lot of debate as to whether this industry will end up more vertically integrated, or what we've seen in the last few years, some driving amongst utilities to effective disintegration and splitting these roles, the various roles. So it's interesting that Total is betting on that integrated across value chain strategy. Julien, I wanted to also ask you a couple of questions that are slightly more about the industry itself and less about Total. So you have a rich perspective on both nuclear and renewables. And there's a lot of debate also about the role of nuclear in bringing on the decarbonized power sector. How do you see that, I suppose, coexistence of these two technologies? Nuclear obviously isn't particularly flexible. RES needs flexibility. France is still betting on, I think, new reactors. How do you see squaring that circle?
I will not comment too much on the nuclear side, but I will comment on your point regarding the intermittency of renewables. Obviously, renewables are intermittent, so there is a lot of work to bring it to the level of being a full solution for the electricity, the power sector. We already see that the combination of PV and wind offers a bit better profile than if you just take the profile of PV, for instance, alone. But we also see a strong development of battery storage. Battery storage is obviously becoming more and more competitive with the decreasing costs of batteries. And this is contributing, in our opinion, this can contribute to partially to the intermittency of renewables. On top of that, as you may know, Total has been developing a portfolio of gas assets, combined cycle power plants in Europe, which are at this stage a necessary complement to renewables because, as you said, they are intermittent.
On that note, hydrogen, I suppose, has been a big topic. I've seen an explosion of interest and investment in hydrogen. Do you think this will play an important role in enabling renewables investment by bringing some of that flexibility and creating demand for renewable power? And if so, again, how quickly do you think this is potentially an area that's overhyped in the short term?
Obviously, there is a lot of interest in the hydrogen field, and it has been growing extremely quickly over the last few months. And we have ourselves a growing interest in hydrogen. Seen from the renewables part of the sector, obviously it's a potentially huge off-taker of green electrons. So we all are pushing for the development of green hydrogen. And seen from the industry, green hydrogen can be a solution and will probably be a solution because there are areas where you have no choice but to have green hydrogen if you want to decarbonize. So, and this is a very strong driver of the current interest in hydrogen. Now, to be frank, I have no specific insight and to tell you when actually it will reach sufficient level of competitiveness to really have an extremely huge development. But for sure, it is part of the solution today. And we are very active in this field, by the way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I want to perhaps finish on, I suppose, a question that's both asks about your broad perspective, but also touches on your individual journey. So you spent a fair amount of time in Asia, which is touted by many to become the key destination of renewables investment in the 2020s, and Total is obviously active there. What will be the key lessons from your time in the region that you think could be particularly relevant to renewables investors today?
Asia is a very significant area of deployment of renewables. China, India, and it's also of the rest of Asia. So it's an area of significant interest for us. We are active in India. We are active also in China, by the way. And we believe it will be one of the significant drivers of the growth of renewables.
Great. Well, this sounds like a a natural point to finish, so we will leave it here. Julien, many thanks for coming to the show and sharing your journey, Total strategy, and your insights into an industry that you know through and through from various different angles. And all the best on achieving your grand ambition. Thank you.
Many thanks.
That was Mateusz Wronski, Head of Digital Solutions at Aurora, speaking to Julien Pouget, Senior Vice President for Renewables at Total. Do keep an eye on our podcast feed for more in-depth conversations with senior members of the energy industry. The best way to do this is to subscribe on whatever platform you use. Thanks for listening and goodbye.